Okay, hey, it's My Games here. Do you know, if you run a business, at some point you're going to find yourself in a position where you're not really sure what to do. And then you have a thing called the expert dilemma. And that is, do you hire an expert, some sort of consultant to come in and help you, or do you muddle through and work it out for yourself? And in my opinion, sometimes you need to do the first one and sometimes you need to do the second one. But the question is, how do you know the difference between the two? So anyway, we were just driving up to see my dad, mum and dad, and we were just telling some stories. My wife just told the story of when my dad was in the army, and suddenly it became clear to me that what he was faced with then was the expert dilemma, and he dealt with it by asking two questions. So I thought if I shared that with you, it might make your dilemma when it crops up so much easier to deal with. So here it is. And we just pulled over, by the way, in a car park. I think it's a garden centre on the way, so I'm safe to speak. Okay, so he was in the army, and after the war, and he was stationed in the Middle East, and his unit for a short period had to go to Egypt. And the very last day, him and a friend decided to climb the Great Pyramid of Giza. Great Pyramid of Pizza, I don't think so. Great Pyramid of Giza. And in those days you could. So turned up and just standing around at the bottom for a bit looking up, and an Egyptian guide comes up and says, do you know what, for a shilling I'll take you boys to the top of the pyramid. And they thought, well, we can see the top, it's just up there, and a shilling, my dad says, was about a day's wages. It's a lot of beer and cigarettes. So he said, no thanks, we'll be okay. Well, he said words to that effect anyway, and they set off. Well, he reckoned that by the time they gave up and had to come back down again, they were about a third of the way up the pyramid, that's all. Because it's a good deal harder when they're in the midst of it than it looked from the bottom. There were big blocks of stone they couldn't get past, they had to go back and double back and a whole bunch of stuff. Now, what he would have purchased had he spent his shilling is two things. The first thing, he would have purchased insurance against failure, right? Because he hires a guide that's climbed the pyramid 1,000 times. You're going to get to the top. You pay your money, you get to the top. The second thing he would have purchased was time. Had he been able to go back for the next 3 or 4 days, perhaps he would have been able to work his own way to the top. But he could have just paid the money and got to the top in double quick time. And those are the two questions that you need to ask yourself when you're faced with that expert dilemma. First thing is, can I afford this to fail? Because if the answer is no, I'm telling you now, you need to get someone in to help. Okay? Because the thing with doing it yourself is it's trial and error. You learn, you fail, you learn, you fail, you move forward, and eventually you get to where you need to go. But if you need it to work, then you need to get that help in. The second thing is, time was of the essence for him. He had no chance to go back, and he was buying that time, and the same applies to you. If it's important to get this problem fixed now, get it done in a short space of time, then again you need to hire that expertise, because that's what it does. Now, interestingly, a few years ago I decided that I wanted to get into social media, and I didn't understand anything about it, so it seemed obvious to me to hire an expert. So I rang around a bit, found someone, spoke to them on the telephone, sounded okay, interviewed them face to face, sounded okay, but you know that thing inside sometimes, this little voice was sort of saying, this doesn't sound right. But you know, it seemed the best game in town, so I committed to the spend and we signed up. Anyway, it didn't take long for me to discover that this guy was only a couple of pages ahead in the social media manual than I was, and it turned out to be a colossal waste of money. So that's the thing I wanted to just round up on. When you've actually decided that you want to hire an expert, how do you make sure that you get the right one? Well, there are three things that you can do. The first thing is you just listen to the little voice inside. If that doesn't ring true, trust it, because it probably isn't going to be right. But more practically, what you can do is two things. Firstly, you can take references out. Now, I'm kind of okay with references, but the trouble is nobody really is going to offer up a name of somebody that's going to give them a bad reference, obviously. So you can only put so much stead on references. Worth taking, of course, but there's a better way, because you're buying expertise, because you're buying knowledge, which is relatively easy for people to provide. So what you can do is you can ask for a try and buy period. Now, if I'd done that with my social media guy, it would have been pretty obvious first day in, and I've said, you know what, actually no, I think we'll call a halt now and we'll just move on our separate ways. I do this all the time with my clients. I let them have a period of time, sometimes as much as 3 months, during which time you decide whether I'm the person for you, whether what I'm saying to you resonates, whether it makes sense, and at the end of it you decide how much you're going to pay. Try and get that into the contract, because A, people will only do it if they feel confident in themselves, and B, does give that opportunity to decide whether this is the right expert or not. Okay, look, we're going to have to get on now because we're going to be late, and Popper's not very keen if we're late. So just very quickly, if I can recap. Firstly, when you find yourself in the expert dilemma, do you need this to work now? And is time of the essence? And if you are going to hire an expert, the question is, does it feel right inside? And then either have you taken some references, or better yet, have you got that try and buy? Okay, look, I'm going to go. So you, good hunting, and let's try and do something different this week.